in 3 different areas of society: college campuses, the military, and in the hip-hop music industry. All of these will be based off movies made by the filmmakers Kirby Dick and Amy Ziering. My name is Louise Henderson. I'm Executive Director of the Indianapolis Film Project, the non-for-profit that powers the Can-Can Cinema, which is a brand new 3-screen theater and center for all things film located in the Near East Side neighborhood of Windsor Park in Indianapolis. We were due to open in March, and like everything else, we are operating largely in the virtual world until it is safe to gather again in movie theaters, restaurants, everywhere else. We have not let this stop our mission, however, to use film to educate, to tackle tough issues, and engage with the needs of our community. I urge you to subscribe to our newsletter, The Weekly, which comes out every Thursday. Check out our website, follow us on social media to see the many events and opportunities that we have on offer. Can-Can Cinema is our social media handle, and cancanindy.com is our website. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight, and we hope that you will not only join us for the other 2 conversations that are coming up in October on the 6th and the 20th, but that you'll also spread the word to others. On Tuesday, October 6th, using the film The Invisible War, we'll address the issue of military sexual assault. We are lining up panelists now, and I look forward to that being a very substantive conversation. On Tuesday, the 20th of October, we'll cover the troubling issues of sexual assault in the music world, specifically within the hip-hop community, starting from the film that came out just this year, On the Record. If you go to our website, cancanindy.com, you can find out more about each one and get registered. All of these events are free, and we just ask that you register in order to get the Zoom link. A couple of housekeeping items. This is a Zoom webinar, so only our panelists are on camera. They all look so lovely, so thank you. This is a conversation, however, so we do encourage you to participate with your questions and your thoughts. And there are 2 ways to do that, based on what you're most comfortable with. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a bar that has a few options. One of them is Q&A. If you want to submit a question via typing it, you can please click on the Q&A button and type in your question or comment and submit it that way. If you prefer to speak in person, there is a raise hand option. Is there a raise hand option? Whoops, wait a minute. I don't see it. Well, maybe raise your hand in the Q&A. Just say, I have a question I'd like to say. And we will unmute you. We'll tell you when we've unmuted you so you can speak. We are rather new in the webinar world, so please excuse us for any errors that we make on the technical side. We do strive to make these events accessible to all. For the visually impaired, I've asked all of our panelists to describe themselves briefly for those who might be of low vision or have impairments. I have dark curly hair, shoulder length hair, and I'm wearing yellow glasses. So that's me, Louise. I will also ask our panelists to do so when they introduce themselves. We are also trying out a closed captioning system. This is brand new to us. So if along that lower bar, there is an option that says closed caption, please click on that to engage that system for yourself. Before our panelists introduce ourselves, I wanted to summarize the film upon which this conversation is based, The Hunting Ground. This documentary film, which was released in 2016, takes on the issue of sexual assault on college campuses. The film primarily follows 2 women who, based off their experience of rape as freshmen at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, became activists, bringing together the stories of many women and to apply pressures on colleges and universities to appropriately investigate the obligations of the requirements of Title IX, a federal rule that I am sure our panelists will all help us understand better. Many women and a few men speak to their experience of assault and failures of their respective schools to act on the allegations. Researchers, psychologists, and others, as well as statistics about the issue, are also featured, painting a difficult and frustrating picture of those who seek redress from school administrators. A few words about documentaries. I've been screening and programming films for many years. I've seen and analyzed many, many documentaries. The essential thing to know about documentaries is that while they are based on true events and stories, it is the truth as seen by the filmmaker, their perspective, their point of view. In The Hunting Ground, the filmmaker's point of view is firmly on the side of those who experienced assault. And while true, the film has faced some criticism and pushback for what some felt was not an even-handed approach. And that is why we're here tonight. Our panel represents a wide range of people who deal with this issue in their careers, and I am interested to hear from them their thoughts about the film, what has transpired since its release in 2016, and what are the issues of concern to them today. Regardless of the criticism that the film has received, typical of any film that takes on an explosive issue, its mere existence has prompted conversation that did need to happen, and heightened awareness for a topic that, as we all know, has too easily been minimized, ignored, swept aside in all parts of society. I truly do look forward to this conversation, your questions and comments, and by the end, I expect that we all will have a fuller understanding of where things stand on college campuses, what has been done with the issue of consent, and what is left to be done. I'm truly grateful to each one of our panelists for agreeing to spend a Monday evening with us and for the work that they do every single day to assist, advocate, and research this important societal issue. So next I would like to introduce our panel. We have a wonderful array of people, and I'm going to start with Dr. Melinda Roberts. So if you could kick us off, describe yourself visually, and then your title and what you do in your daily work.
Thank you, Louise. I appreciate that, and I appreciate being invited to be here with you tonight. In terms of physical description of myself, I have a virtual background of my university up right now, which is kind of funny because it keeps cutting half my hair off constantly. So, you know, I keep seeing that move around. It's kind of funny. And my hair is ash blonde. I wear black glasses and I'm wearing a houndstooth dress. So that's me. And I am a professor of criminal justice. I'm also the associate dean of the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Southern Indiana. I've dedicated my entire life, education, and career to issues of victimology, specifically in the area of sexual assault, intimate partner violence, intimate partner homicide, and human trafficking. In the community, I serve as the co-chair of SIRCAT, which stands for Southwest Indiana Regional Coalition Against Trafficking. On my campus community, and I have a couple of my colleagues here as well that sat on this committee. Maybe Steve's been there longer than me, I'm not sure, but we've been sitting on the sexual assault and gender violence prevention group. I've been there for 11 years in that group, where we work together with a variety of stakeholders that are in the community, that work at Albion Fellows Bacon Center, and those kinds of things with SIRCAT. That also includes public safety, the counseling center, housing and residence, the dean of students, Title IX coordinator, and all those folks that are important about coming up with policies about how to deal with campus sexual assault. So I kind of come from this as the position on the panelist, more from the academic side of things in my research and the things that I publish. I published a book on traditional gender attitudes and violence against women, and several articles that deal with sexual assault, and some that delve very deeply into the sexual assault on campus. So I'm more of this statistician of the group, I would imagine.
Thanks, Melinda. Let's move on to Madeline Bogan.
Hi, so I have, I guess I'm gonna say like purple and greenish and blondish hair that hasn't been colored in a while, so that's why I can't quite pick a color. And it's up in a high ponytail, and I have a nose ring and a green sweater on. And I work at Albion Fellows Bacon Center. So no, we do not serve bacon. We're a community-based advocacy center in Vanderburgh County, and we have an 11-county service region. I work in our non-residential program, to be specific. So I am technically a crisis intervention specialist with a focus on sexual assault. So within that role, I serve on different committees. I also am part of our local sexual assault response team, as well as serving on a crime prevention program. And then I also participate with our state coalition in different things like our state conference calls. So yeah, I do legal advocacy as well as individual advocacy, and that does span, of course, to our local colleges and universities.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Burton Patterson, welcome.
Hi, everybody. I hope everyone's doing well. Thanks for this opportunity, Luis. I'm very excited to be a part of the panel. I would starting off with physical appearance, I will preface it by saying this is my during COVID look as opposed to my pre-COVID look. I currently have more hair on my face than on my head. And I'm wearing a plaid shirt. I'm probably the most non-traditional panelist out of everyone because I'm not directly tied to a campus or university. I work for the Indiana Coalition to End Sexual Assault and Human Trafficking. My current role is the Director of Prevention and Education. I oversee all of our prevention services across the state with a primary focus on engaging boys and men. So that's my heavy focus as far as my day-to-day task. I created a curriculum and a program called Speak Up, Speak Out Project, which I facilitate to several groups on several campuses around the state. And it focuses on redefining masculinity, sort of breaking down the oppressive systems that make rape culture possible, and engaging men in these conversations so we can become better allies and sort of break down those rigid definitions of traditional masculinity, traditional gender norms, and focus our efforts on how to be better allies towards women in gender equality. So that's my primary focus, while also creating a statewide primary prevention campaign focused on bystander intervention called Step In, which also we partner with several campuses around the state with different curriculum, programming, different primary prevention awareness ads as far as social media is concerned. So my perspective is a little different than the traditional campus faculty or staff because I do work on campuses, but it's not as hands-on in the actual Title IX department or the administration. So excited to be here. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Burton, and we really welcome your perspective. Stephannie.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to participate in this panel discussion. Every opportunity that I get to speak to different people about what our campus does and Title IX, I think is a great opportunity. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I probably have shoulder length blonde hair. I'm wearing my cheaters. If I've gotten to the point now I don't have my cheaters on, I can't see. And I'm wearing my Title IX pin. I'm proud to display it. I've worked at Indiana State University for 5 years. I started in the General Counsel's office and then moved over to become the Director of Equal Opportunity and the Title IX coordinator. All institutions K through 12 and higher ed are required to designate a Title IX coordinator. At ISU, I serve on our President's Council on Inclusive Excellence, so I have a voice in that panel. And then I'm also an ex officio member of our Sycamores Care. It's a group of ISU professionals who address those student concerns that may not be conduct, they may not be academic, may not be a residential life. They're just student concerns that the student's gotten on someone's radar for some reason, and our job is to reach out and provide assistance to help them matriculate. Our goal is to graduate students, and whatever we can do to assist them, that's what we try to do. And
Thank
Burton,
you.
I'm so glad to see you. When you said speak up, speak out, I've heard one of your presentations, and so I recognized you through a conference I attended where you presented last year. So nice to see you again.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, Steve Bequette.
My name is Steve Bequette, and I represent the University of Southern Indiana. I'm currently the Director of Public Safety, and I've held that position for approximately 2 years. And the approximate 9 years prior to that, I was the Assistant Director of Public Safety. My background is law enforcement. I have spent roughly 34 years with the Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Office. Majority of that, 24 plus years, was in criminal investigations. So I bring a wide variety to the Title IX table. I am a former Title IX investigator, have attended lots of training in Title IX and helped with the committee on formulating our current plans and procedure with Title IX. I am about 5'7", have short curly brown hair, and my grandkids tell me that other than that, I kind of look like Shrek. So give that up to your own imagination. We work at Public Safety closely with Title IX. Many times the initial report emanates from Public Safety. Our officers are all trained in trauma-informed interviewing. Majority of our cases on campus now originate straight to the Title IX office. We do assist at times when called upon by the Title IX office if certain backgrounds need to be done. But other than that, we liaison with them to make sure, being the Clery officer on campus, to make sure that we capture any Clery statistics for our yearly federal reports. Other than that, that's my background.
Thank you. Thank you. We're pleased to have you. And last but very much not least, Sam Preston, welcome.
Thank you. And for everyone that's on tonight, thanks for spending your time with us. Again, I'm Sam Preston. I am the Assistant Director of Public Safety at the University of Southern Indiana. Ironically, my timeline follows my boss's. I've been there just a little over 2 years myself. So when he moved into the director's position, I was able to become assistant director. Much like Steve, I also have a background in law enforcement. I spent 28 years with the Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Office. Many of that was working with crisis intervention. I did a lot as our training coordinator, where I did work hand in hand with Albion quite a bit. I do bring from a previous career before that a background in mental health. I do a lot of work in suicide prevention, post-prevention, and intervention. And we also know that, with a lot of our victims, they're often in crisis and experiencing some issues. So I bring that to the table. And just like Steve said, we work very, very closely with our Title IX office, as much as we can with our counseling center too, as much as they can reveal to us. And right now we're doing a lot of work just getting ready for our Clery submissions for the end of this year.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. And I want to remind everyone who is attending this webinar that we really invite and welcome your input and thoughts. We do have, if you wish to submit any comments or questions through the Q&A option, which is at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, a screen opens up and you can submit it. If you'd like to ask your question in person, please mention that as well. I don't see a raise hand function. So if you have a raise hand function, please do that. If not, just put your question in the Q&A and say, I'd like to ask this, and we'll unmute you. So this is to be a conversation. And so I really invite you to do that. A question has come in, and I think just for those of us who are brand new to all this, both Sam and Steve had mentioned Clery submissions or reports. Can you explain what those are? Because all of you nodded like, of course, you know exactly what that is, but those of us lay people don't.
Sure. The Jean Clery Federal Statistics Act, which was passed in the late 80s and has been redone many times, is basically about transparency on college campuses. In the past, some college campuses used to fudge their crime statistics to make their university a more attractive place to attend college. This act eliminates that. If you receive federal aid from the federal government, you are required to report specific statistics on an annual security, fire, and safety report the last 3 years. Those statistics have been revamped by the Violence Against Women's Act to include dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking, and also bias crimes. So we work closely with Title IX because, as I mentioned earlier, many of those offenses that are reported go directly to them, and they are confidential and not reported to public safety, where we can readily count those. Many of the statistics that we do report are just that, a statistic. And we may not know any of the specific information about it, but someone has reported confidentially. So we work closely with Title IX to make sure that we are in compliance with that federal law.
There's a question that did come in that kind of, thank you for that explanation. That's really helpful. Based on that sort of reporting, are there sort of times of year where you see spikes in assault cases, particularly sexual assault cases? Are there patterns? Are there not? Are they random?
That directed to me?
Anybody who wishes to answer. And it probably varies by campus, perhaps, or not. I don't know.
Well, the USI, as soon as the fall semester starts, the statistics start rolling in. In the summer, where there's not many people on campus, we do not get that many reports. One thing we do, though, with our background, we monitor what happens off campus also with our students, so that we can also provide resources to any students that do come to USI that may have been involved off campus and not really under the guidance of Title IX. We assist them in any way we can, even if it happens off campus.
Stephannie?
There is a, I want to call, I think it's a phenomenon that I believe researchers at Ball State have identified as the red zone. And it's that period of time when students first return to campus in the fall, so sometime in August, and then the end date varies, whether it's through your campus's homecoming, or fall break, or Thanksgiving. But anecdotally, that seems to be the time when colleges and universities experience the most reports of sexual violence. I don't know that anyone's in a study to attribute what that is, what can be, whether it's students having that freedom with no curfews and access to alcohol and a completely different lifestyle. I don't know that anyone studied what the rationale would be, but that seems to be when anecdotally campuses see the most reports. Towards the end of semesters, at the end of for winter break, we're gone half December, half of January. I think there's another small spike usually in the spring. But I mean, anecdotally, that's our campus.
I would say that definitely there's a pattern overall, Stephannie. And from my understanding, a big part of that is that we notice that there are significantly higher rates whenever it comes to freshmen, particularly at that beginning time in August. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they aren't fully submitted within like campus culture. And so they're still trying to find their place. They may be hanging out with people that they don't know as well. They haven't developed as much rapport. And of course, also, like you mentioned, that beginning, getting that taste of freedom, drinking, maybe not understanding how much they can drink without feeling, in control. And so especially in that time, upperclassmen tend to prey on freshmen.
And in terms of reporting too, those times that were mentioned that there tends to be more reports, you also find that that's when universities are also doing heavy programming. So at the very beginning of a semester, we're doing a lot of orientation, especially with freshmen, about sexual assault and who to contact. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, right? So we have all that information out there about who to talk up to. And so, you kind of see that correlated. So, you know, when I look at national trends and national statistics overall, there's actually, what we find is there's no time that people are more likely to get sexually assaulted. But what we notice at the universities is because they're physically located at our place, we see trends. But, you know, the odds of that happening when they go home to their home state or their home area and somewhere else that's not related to the university is also high. Not to say that there's not a higher risk at the university, but, you know, in terms of that age range, you just see that happening whether they're at a university, whether they're not at a university as well.
Burton, is there anything that you would add to that?
Just piggybacking off of what Madeline mentioned about sort of those predatory behaviors and how the grooming often takes place in those first couple of weeks amongst freshmen and upperclassmen, seeing that opportunity to sort of groom their victim. And that happens so often when you talk about sort of that rape culture component, is that that's seen as men viewing women as objects and as prey in those moments of, this is someone that I can easily manipulate. I'm going to take this opportunity to do so at the time. And like she said, before they have an established group of friends, before they're really comfortable and they're in their element, that's a time that we often see the perpetration taking place.
Very helpful. We've got some other questions, but I think I want to ask this baseline question just to kind of help center our conversation. And that is, of course, one of the major themes of the film concerns how universities have responded or failed to respond to reports of sexual assault on campus. But the film is also 4 years old. So I'm really interested in your perspectives on what has and hasn't changed in how all of this is handled on campuses today. It's kind of a big question, but I think we kind of have to establish that baseline to help us get to the present day and what you guys see in your daily lives. Who wants to kick us off?
I think that, you know, it's definitely become a normalized conversation on college campuses. This isn't something that we're not discussing anymore. Kind of like Melinda mentioned that we do see a lot of programming, even thinking about how did I get into this work? I graduated from college fairly recently. And so when I was at school, they even had students getting involved and invested in Title IX programming. And that's kind of what led me on this path, was after, you know, doing all of this programming and recognizing, you know, from my time at college, what high rates of domestic and sexual violence are occurring, not just on college campuses, but in general, that I think that we're really educating and empowering an entire generation of students to be equipped to have these conversations, to be able to be supports to their friends. Whether or not the colleges are doing a better job responding to complaints, that's a different question altogether. I know that the Hunting Ground did a really great job of highlighting why is it that a university would not want to be super transparent. Why wouldn't they want to address these things? And a lot of it goes back to money. You know, unfortunately, our college system's for profit generally. And even for the schools that are considered nonprofit schools, there is like a profit component that we see. And so wanting to not alienate donors, not wanting to disappoint alumni, not wanting to make the news for bad reasons. You know, you hear that one story where it's that clip of the mother, or it's a specialist talking about, like, you know, what if we sent letters home that was like, there's a 1 in 4 chance that your kid's going to get shot in a drive-by shooting. But, you know, welcome to our university. Please send them here next week. And so, you know, to what degree does transparency create a culture of fear? And whether or not the universities are willing to take that risk.
I feel like I've really witnessed a culture shift on our campus that I'm really proud of. No longer are we shy of discussing it. Our policies, our procedures, our programming is front and center. And there is no shyness about talking about sexual violence reporting, what resources are available. I know back in 2015 when we changed our policy to make just about all of our employees, responsible employees, basically mandatory reporters, we felt a little bit of pushback, you know, like, what if I'm the one faculty member that this student discloses to, and you expect me to tell the Title IX office? We saw a lot of pushback back then, but I feel like we've done what we need to do on our campus to get information out that we're not going to trample on that student. Our role is, we don't know about something, we can't do anything to help that student. So at a minimum, get that student connected to our offices so that we can offer supportive services, that we can be there for that student. I also think there's been a big shift in the NCAA's position on sexual violence. In 2017, their board of regents passed a resolution that all NCAA programs had to have mandatory annual training. So not just one and done their freshman year, but every single year for coaches, volunteers, and athletes. And you know, I'm the first one, when I do my slide, I take all those embarrassing headlines from other athletic programs, and I do a whole slide of, you don't want this to be you. And so not only is it my voice educating, I've got people that have bought in throughout the entire campus community. So our athletics department, fraternities and sorority, all of our SGA, our Student Government Association, everybody has bought in, and we're all providing a consistent message about how important it is to have these discussions.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on what Stephannie said. You know, very similar to our university. You know, I was very, very impressed. I started at USI in 2009, and when I showed up, they already had a sexual assault task force in place, which I immediately became a part of. And they had a student group of all male students that was called MARV, Male Allies Against Rape and Violence, which was super cool that these guys were going around campus, like shouting the message. And then we also had 3 other groups that were student groups that were related to different issues of violence. And then now now that we have, you know, Title IX and some of the laws that have changed and those kinds of things, we now kind of switch from a task force to more of the group that I was talking about earlier when I did my introduction. And we do have a student group that's aligned with us as well. So they do their own thing, so the students are in charge of it, but there's a sexual assault and gender violence student group that they take charge of. We do faculty trainings that are required on sexual assault, so everybody knows how to report that and what the process is. We have students that take that and go through that. You know, I kind of take it for granted because I think we're so lucky that we're at a university that does a really great job of dealing with this. But the question is, you know, are other universities doing as great of a job, or are they, you know, is this problem still happening? You know, I guess is the question that Louise really gave to us. And it's, you know, Schwartz and DeKesserty, if you ever can read their stuff, they're great. It's easy to read. But there are a couple of researchers that looked into male peer support theory and sexual assault on college campuses. And they did tons and tons of research. They published several books on it. But one of the things that they found is there's different risk factors that will exponentially increase the chances of sexual assault. And if you have groups that are alcohol-centered, you know, objectification of women, you know, all of these different factors, and, you know, sadly, fraternities and sports groups and those kind of things fit this description pretty easily sometimes. That's where you get that. And again, you know, universities, I think 10, 15 years ago, were hesitant to do something to these folks because they were their stars. And kind of like Madeline is saying, you know, they're making a lot of money from people coming to their football games or, you know, to this or to that. And, you know, to get rid of that star player or that team or to punish a whole team for this was harder for them to do. So yeah, that was a real problem. But, you know, I think again, like Stephannie, not only is there a culture shift at the university, but there's a culture shift in our society with the Me Too movement, with all the stuff that's going on and people willing to stand up and say that they're not going to tolerate it. And I think that cultural shift in itself has also helped propel some of the changes in people's willingness to report. The fact that, you know, reports have gone up, and it's not because sexual assaults went up. It's because people feel like there's a safe space to come forward now in a community that will receive that information without judgment. So I think we've seen more of those kinds of changes too.
And to piggyback off of everything that all of you all said, which is fantastic, the cultural shift is right in my wheelhouse as we talk about sort of what it looks like with male allies on campuses. Now, I'm so glad, Melinda, that you mentioned the risk factors, because sort of as you talk about hostility towards women and hypermasculinity, and some of those societal norms that support sexual violence, those conversations are possible now because of documentaries like The Hunting Ground, because we're having those conversations now. I don't think it would have been as easy for me to engage groups 4 or 5 years ago as it is now, because specifically I started working with fraternities, and as you all know, fraternities, I mean, the entire Greek system is its own like ecological system that exists outside of everything that is basically what we know, and it has such a hierarchy that it's tough to get in. It's tough to get that buy-in, especially from groups like that, like fraternities and athletics. But like you were saying, Stephannie, once you get that buy-in from a group, that's when that culture change really starts to take hold. And fortunately for me, as I reach out to individual fraternities on campuses across the state, for the majority of it, the fraternities want to be a part of this conversation. Of course, I get pushback because these are difficult conversations to have with college-age men, but overwhelmingly, they want to be a part of this conversation. If not even for culture change, they want the appearance of, okay, I'm stepping out in front of this. I want to make it seem like I'm a part of this movement. And even for me, if it seems superficial, I know that in those moments I can still capture some people. I can change some thoughts or some behaviors, even if they're not doing it for the reasons that I want. I know that there's still those moments to grow in those areas. So I get pushback sometimes, but overwhelmingly, I would say that culture change is happening, and I'm seeing a lot of progress from the groups that I'm working with. I recently started working with IUPUI's male athletics, and I originally started working with the swimming and diving team, and they were awesome, and they wanted to be engaged. A little hesitant at first, the first few sessions, but they warmed up and they opened up and they showed themselves to be vulnerable, and they shared in this space that was safe and non-judgmental. And oftentimes men on college campuses specifically don't necessarily have that space where they can share openly without being judged or without being ridiculed. So once that swimming and diving team bought in, they then became champions for me and pushed the program to other athletic teams within the athletic department. So now we're looking at working with all of male athletics of IUPUI because of that culture change on that one team. So that's a small example for us how that ripple effect is happening, where we affect change in this one area, and then it sort of just starts to spread throughout the campus. Now, I see that in fraternities too. I often play up on the competitiveness between the fraternities. I work a lot with Beta Theta Pi chapters, and if an ATO chapter sees a Beta Theta Pi is spearheading sexual assault prevention on their campus, I often go to them and say, well, they're doing this, they're spearheading this, they're in front of this, they're male allies, you all can jump on board too, you can be a part of this movement. So that ripple effect is real as we talk about the male ally movement. So I think it's happening. To answer your question, Luis, I think we have a lot of work to do, but it's in a place now. When I was in college 10, 12 years ago, these conversations were not prevalent. They were not happening. Everything was pushed under the rug. Everything is fine. It's hunky-dory. Nothing is going wrong. But now we're actually addressing it. And the fact that there are men willing to step up and address it and call out their peers, that's more impactful than anything else I could do personally, is that peer call out.
I also think we do a disservice if we use lots of heteronormative language. Absolutely, we have to acknowledge that sexual violence doesn't hold true to gender lines. The new Title IX reg that came out this summer gave our institution an opportunity to remove some of that gender language from our policy. So we no longer refer to him and her. We try to be inclusive of our non-binary students, because it is realization that sexual assault occurs across all genders. And so that's a conversation that we probably weren't having 10, 15 years
Absolutely.
ago that we do now. And it's those populations, those intersectionality groups of minorities that we really have to infiltrate them to make them feel comfortable in reporting their concerns to our office. We can't, that heteronormative language can really disarm people or turn them off to the process.
And the socially conscious awareness of this generation, just, they want that. They want to be engaged at that level. So when you do, you're showing that you care about them, that you understand them. And it's a completely different connection that we could have ever had previously, because that's what they're seeking. They're seeking sort of that gender fluidity.
What's the public safety angle on this?
Totally agree with the culture change. And I think anyone with knowledge and experience in Title IX would agree that since 2011, when the Dear Colleagues letters came out, that we've all been building the airplane as we're flying it. And we still are with the new guidance. Things change. We've changed some direction, whether for the good or bad. But the one thing that I've noticed, being a former Title IX investigator and working with Title IX quite a bit, is what gets universities in trouble is they don't have that sense of urgency about some things, and some let cases just meander on. It may depend on who it is, or usually what I found is the process that the university has. It's not tight, it's not consistent in doing what they need to do. But that sense of urgency gets a lot of universities in trouble.
So a lot of what I'm hearing you guys talk about is sort of the openness to people reporting, and that consciousness and the advocacy and the allies. What is happening? And there's a question that came in. What is, so then once there is a report, how is that going? Has that improved or changed in some way on campuses of colleges getting away from what Madeline talked about, being embarrassed or afraid of their reputation being damaged? Have things changed on that end too? Of course, the film, paints a kind of a tough picture for several schools in that. And I'm curious to know, okay, so basically the prevention and the awareness and the consciousness and the intake is improving, but how is it happen? How are things being resolved? Has it changed? Is it getting better? It's hard to speak globally, I know, but to your individual experiences.
I feel like one of my roles and responsibilities as a Title IX coordinator is to make sure that the participants, whether they're the complainant or the respondent, and I saw a question about how we identify the parties, whether it's victim or survivor. On our campus, and in the Title IX regs, they refer to the person making the accusation as the complainant, and the person about whom the accusation is made as a respondent. I feel like our role is to make sure that the parties understand our policy, our procedures, that we're absolutely transparent, that we tell them all of their options. I always tell them, I do a lot of talking because I need you to know all of your options. I feel like if you know all of your choices, you're going to have the opportunity to make a better choice. And the idea that I would not tell a complainant that they have the ability to report to law enforcement is devastating. Like that is part of the routine. Like, you to tell who you want to tell. If you want to report to law enforcement, I can connect you to someone who can help you do that. So the idea that we're trying to dissuade people from participating in the process or not reporting to law enforcement, I think that's a time gone by. I just feel like if Title IX coordinators aren't sharing all of that information consistently, up front with complete transparency, it's really a dereliction.
Do you, if we were to ask the students on your respective campuses, does their experience, like, I'm sure, I mean, there's always going to be people who are going to dissent and disagree, but do you think in general, you feel that the student body understands the approach that your administration, those who exist to help the Title IX folks and on up exist to help them through the process? Whereas I guess what I'm asking is because the hunting ground makes it feel a bit like, well, they're not always as open to it, or they try to talk the claimants out of it. Do you feel that on your campuses, the majority of students would agree with what you guys are saying to us tonight?
I think it's an ongoing process. I've got the least experience with higher education here with 2 years, but what I've seen is I think we continue to grow and get better. I know just recently with the University of Southern Indiana, we just hired a new deputy coordinator whose job is in engagement and outreach and providing some programming to engage more of our fraternities, our sports clubs. So I think it's this, that I think we're developing a lot of safety nets, and I think that where I see is going to the Title IX office is safe. And I don't know if that was the case a few years ago, but I have seen that. I've seen that change. I think that does start though with that education piece is so important that our students know that there's lots of ways to access resources, and I heard Stephannie mention the responsible employee. That's a part of it. I know our resident assistants, with their behind closed doors training, I think enables them to see things and point people in the right direction. And I think the fact that all the major agency or major groups within the University of Southern Indiana work together to try to make that happen.
Okay. I think one of you mentioned this before, but I wanted to clarify based off of a question. Just the general societal changes toward greater awareness and greater comfort about talking about it and being vulnerable and being an ally. The Me Too movement, that was the question, the Me Too movement, would you say that has had a contributing effect to the general increase in awareness and comfort with talking about this issue and bringing it to the fore?
I would say yes. Even statistically, following the Me Too movement, the publicity, we noticed higher reporting numbers consistent with that time. I think, and I think there's a better definition of what sexual harassment is. And I think people had a better understanding. It's not just sexual assault. It could be all those other things that make your educational experience less than what it should be. And so I think people felt more empowered to report.
Okay. To another question, Burton, perhaps you can help us understand. You mentioned fraternities and really working with them. Does it vary by campus, whether they're completely independent units or whether they have, or like, what's the relationship on most campuses between the Greek system and the college or university itself?
Someone can correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think it varies from campus to campus.
Mm-hmm.
I think some campuses are more involved in day-to-day Greek activities than others. But I know specifically when I work with the Beta Theta Pi fraternity, they worked very closely with campus. I know that most campuses have a director of campus life that oversees a lot of the activities that happen. But as far as like I'm not sure exactly what's asked by governance. Like, I don't think the university governs them per se. I think there are guidelines and applicable like restrictions or guidelines that they have to follow based on the community, based on the campus. But I don't think there's any governance from specific campuses, if that makes sense.
Some of the schools own the property.
Yes.
Correct, of some of
Yeah.
them. So often they'll use the leverage that they have as property owners.
But I know that many fraternities and sororities are trying to move away from that and trying to purchase the property themselves. So taking some of that control back is a goal for many of those organizations.
Okay. That's helpful. There is a question to the fact saying many victims don't come forward because they don't think that they'll be taken seriously. And the film certainly made that point. So based on what all of you were saying today in 2020, that's no longer the case, or it's better. So the question is then, when an assault is proven, how is that information shared?
So I would say from an advocate's perspective, that first of all, yes and no, that I think that it's better, definitely, whenever we're thinking about what are the victims being taken seriously, but rape culture still exists, and victim blaming still happens. And part of what we've seen with these growing conversations with the Me Too movement is not just this growing understanding that sexual assault happens, but also all of these testimonies that show us that victims don't get treated seriously, that they aren't approached in the way they should be. And while universities are certainly doing a better job at that, and I know that throughout our community, sexual assault nurse examiners, police, prosecutors, down the line, there's training and there's education and there's conversations happening, but the system really does frequently re-victimize survivors. And so, I think that there's also an awareness of that. I work with clients all of the time who say, I want to report, but I just don't think it's going to go anywhere because they've seen those data. So that's kind of part of it as well. And I would say that as far as what happens whenever the assault is proven, it's so hard to say because really evidence can prove that more often than not, evidence proves that sex occurred. It doesn't necessarily prove that an assault occurred because most of the time there aren't a lot of injuries. In fact, injuries are actually more common if it's actually within a domestic violence relationship. Most sexual assault, I would say it's roughly 50%. There are no visible injuries left behind. And so then it's a matter of proving whether or not consent was there. And that's a different matter altogether. And then from a legal perspective, whether or not a jury would consider that at that point, there's reasonable belief that consent was not established. And I know that with the Title IX changes, we've seen more of a move toward sort of those legal type practices that we would see in a criminal court. We've kind of enhanced those standards. I know somebody had mentioned it's in part due to the lawsuits that we've seen on the side of perpetrators who are claiming that they are not getting a fair say in these inter-school systems of handling this issue.
I also think if those people who may not be familiar with university processes, it's very possible that a single incident could be both a policy violation and a crime. So it's possible there may be two investigations going on at the same time. The law enforcement may be investigating a crime, and the university may be investigating a policy violation. And typically the standard of evidence is different in a crime and a policy violation. Myself as a Title IX coordinator, I don't have the ability to subpoena where in a criminal process they do. And so it's really important to understand that where an individual, they sometimes have the opportunity to participate in both and may choose to participate in both or one or the other. But I just think there's value in knowing there potentially could be two investigations going with two different results, and one doesn't necessarily impact the other.
Thoughts? Other perspectives? This is kind of like really right at the heart of where it gets difficult, right?
The other thing I would say is, I think this came through in the movie, The Hunting Ground. I don't think most college campuses have a problem with strangers lurking in dark corners or hiding in alleys and jumping out and sexually assaulting our students. Those aren't the kinds of cases that we're getting reported. The ones that they described, The Hunting Ground, those are they're both at the same place, consensually at the same time for the same function, and then things go off the rails. They usually know their perpetrator. So I think it's important to know that when we're talking about college safety, I just want people to think there's an idea that there are these predator rapists hiding in dark alleys, preying on nameless, unidentified victims.
Stephannie, I think you make such an important point, and I think that really a next step in our conversation about campuses and how do we really change that campus culture is having a conversation about sex itself. So, a lot of times, once again, having recently been a college student myself, students will go out on the weekends, they'll drink heavily with the intention of having sex. But it gets to the point where they can't make a clear decision for themselves. They become incapacitated and consent is impossible. Those good conversations that we should be having about sex, we get to avoid them when we're drunk a lot of times. And students, I think, are coming from frequently backgrounds where they've been taught abstinence-only education. And so they come to college and they think they have to have an excuse to have casual sex. And alcohol provides that excuse, but it also blurs boundaries and makes it difficult to achieve consent. So whenever we get to the point where we can finally talk to college students about owning their desire, about owning the fact that it's okay if they're interested or curious or horny and that they want to just have sex on a Tuesday, because where we can have sober conversations about sex and recreational sex, that I think then we'll really get to a point where maybe we can kind of change what sexual assault looks like on campuses and minimize it a bit.
You couldn't hear it, but I was over here snapping for you. All of that, all of that.
So based on that point on consent, Jen Thomas, who is with Women for Change and the Clothesline Indiana, and the organization that Burton is with, I'm sorry, I just lost my, where'd it go? The question just went away, or I'm not seeing it. I'm sorry, because actually it's more of a statement. So Jen Thomas, I'm trying to be very, there we go. I'm trying to be very clear. So last week, Women for Change and the Indiana Coalition to End Sexual Assault and Human Trafficking are working with state legislators to create a law defining consent. A study committee chaired by State Representative Wendy McNamara of Evansville, who you ladies probably know, you all ladies and men in Evansville, met in her testimony just last week. So, and then to piggyback on then to another question on that same thing, that currently sex without consent is not a crime in Indiana. Do your universities support legislation that clearly defines consent in a rape case so that juries have clear guidelines when deciding the guilt or innocence of an accused rapist? She continues by saying, currently it's my understanding that juries are asked by judges to use their common sense. I would love for all of you to maybe sort of chew on that a bit and help give us some clarity here. Who wants to go first?
Well, I want to speak to what my, because, we're a public university, so it won't necessarily take sides on laws or endorse anything like that. But, I'll just talk a little bit about, the lead up, the history of sexual assault law. It's always been very gendered in nature in the way that it was written. And originally we used to have what was called the utmost resistance standard, which basically meant that a woman wasn't raped unless she had fought as much as she could and they overcame her resistance. Well, clearly, if you think about that being the case, what's going to happen? if somebody fights back, they're going to get injured more, right? So that's a more dangerous situation for somebody to be in. So then they moved it to what they called the reasonable person standard. Like, is it reasonable that they should have fought back in that situation or not? And then eventually they finally took out that component. And then there was corroboration component for a long time, for many years. And so the idea was that we know, as Stephannie said earlier, stranger rape, even though we have stranger danger that we've talked about many years, when it comes to rape and sexual assault, those account for less than 10% of rapes and sexual assaults that happen in almost any jurisdiction. And so really the danger is from in an intimate space. You don't have witnesses typically hanging out that can attest to this. And when you talk about rape kits and things like that, again, like those are going to show, yeah, sex, just like Madeline said, it's going to show sex occurred, but it doesn't necessarily say if it was consensual or non-consensual and those types of things. And we know that a lot of women don't fight back because, women's response to trauma and traumatic events is so different and varying, right? And so when you look at this, and then if you look at the language, like even the FBI, the UCR, which is the Uniform Crime Reports, which is the typical statistical database that we use to tabulate any kind of crime in the United States. I mean, eventually we're going to hopefully move on to NIBRs, which is a little bit better, but we don't have all counties reporting to this yet. So we still kind of use UCRs, and UCRs has a lot of problems. One of the problems is that they only will pick one crime. So if somebody commits 3 crimes in the same instance, they're only going to put one, they're going to pick one, and they're going to talk about, and that's the one that gets reported, not all 3. Also, for the longest time, only a man could commit the crime of rape against a woman under that. So the thing is there's just been problems with the law historically and forever, and there still is in all the books. And one of the things, actually one of the very first things I ever studied, because courts and law is my other area, so that I specialize in. And for the longest time, I used to study jury nullification. And I don't know if you all know what jury nullification is, because the Supreme Court says you do. That's why you don't need to be told about it. My argument has always been, you don't know that it exists, right? So jury nullification basically says that we have juries because they can apply community standards. So if somebody commits a crime, and you don't necessarily think that crime, yes, you may believe absolutely that they did it, but you don't think that they should be punished for it because of their circumstances, then you cannot punish them. But then when we look at rape and sexual assault, it's the other side of things. If there's not enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, but you believe that it happened and that person should be punished, you can then actually convict. But when you look at most jury instructions, what it will say is that if you, based on the evidence presented in front of you, you think all elements of this crime as it is written have been committed, then you must decide in this way, right? So the way jury instructions are given doesn't necessarily allow for jurors to understand the right to jury nullification. And so you don't have to have a definitive beyond reasonable doubt case for a jury to decide against that. Now, there's a reason I have never been asked to be on a jury and I won't even get summons. And it's probably because I know about jury nullification. So if you're ever on a jury, don't probably use that word. But yeah, so, there are some differences with the law that has really made it prohibitive. And yeah, there's re-victimization and double victimization and those things that we talk about, because just going through the process itself can be so damaging and re-traumatizing for victims and survivors as they go through that. And so some, sadly don't want to go through that process because it's just too hard for them, and it's understandable. But yeah, so, you see this pyramid of drop off, right? First there's the large group of people that aren't even reporting. Then once they do report, there's such a large group of people who won't actually take it to law enforcement past the university. And then when they do take it to law enforcement, even if law enforcement is 100% behind them, supporting them, and want to pass this on to the prosecutor, like they don't want to help the prosecutor, and so sadly you just get so much drop off, because once you've told your story for the 7th or 8th time, I mean, just imagine, experiencing that and then constantly having to talk about it and relive it. So it's tough, but yeah. So, laws in terms of that, I think maybe for those of you that don't know the history of rape and sexual assault and what that's come out of and what those standards of proof are, looking at then to now, it's pretty impressive, especially when we had rape law reform in the 80s and the 90s, and there started to be a lot of changes in terms of that. And, there also used to be, there's rape shield laws now. And if you're not familiar with rape shield laws, what those were before those were passed is people could bring in evidence of a woman's past sexual history. And so essentially, if you weren't chaste, then you couldn't be a rape victim, right? Because they would say, well, she wasn't raped because she had sex with these 2 other people last year, or, you know, or this other person. And so now, you know, you can't bring that into court. And so we have those rape shield laws. So there's a lot of protections now that exist within the criminal court system to help victims as well. So there has been not only a cultural change, but there have been legal changes. And if the question is, do there need to be more? Yes. Yes, they do. Pay attention to your legislators with elections coming up. But yeah. Okay.
Just one thing to say off of what Melinda shared. You know, I definitely think affirmative consent is a mandatory next step. We know that it's effective. We know other states have tried it and it's gone well for them. That's actually what I wrote my thesis about. But, you know, thinking about victim behavior and the neurobiology of trauma, I don't want to get too into it because it's complicated, but essentially, like, whenever we're experiencing trauma, the rational, reasonable part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, shuts down, and then the amygdala takes over. And that's a fear-based response, and it's beyond our control. We literally can't choose how we respond in that moment. It's just how our brain decides is the best way to protect us. And studies have suggested that more than 50% of sexual assault victims will freeze in that moment. For more than 50% of sexual assault survivors, more than half, their response is going to be essentially to lay there, not to fight back, not to struggle, not to run. It's just part of how we're evolved in the way that our mind and our body decides that we need to be protected in that moment. So yeah, if our standard is violence or screaming or saying no and pushing and, you know, continuing to be persistent in your resistance, for so many people at that point, it's past their ability. And that's also why it's so hard for survivors to come forward, because, you know, whenever you explain to someone, no, I didn't fight back, no, I didn't even say no out loud, a lot of times people tend to start not believing them, which is very unfair. And so that's why if we kind of switch that standard from no and force and resistance to yes, I would like to have sex, you know, the absence of a no does not mean yes.
Back up her points there. Anyone that would like to do further reading on the trauma that affects victims should look up David Lisak, Lisak. Foremost expert in that, without taking any more time.
Burton, is there anything that, or Stephannie, that you guys would like to add to what Melinda and Madeline have spoken to? And I guess what I would ask as an addition, which is asked in our questions, is how is psychological injury accounted for when they're looking at handling these cases?
One way that we try to acknowledge that is all of our participants are invited to bring a support person with them to all meetings with us, because we know this is anxiety riddled. It is scary to participate in a university process. It's scary to talk to an administrator who's a stranger about something so personal. And so one way that we try to mitigate that is invite them to bring someone you trust with you. They can't speak on your behalf. They're not going to answer questions on your behalf, but at least there's someone in the room that if you're blocking out everything that's being said or you're not capturing it all, when you're walking away from my office, you can still discuss it and go through that information. So that's one step we try to make it a little bit easier, but we refer our students to the Student Counseling Center. That's a confidential resource. And we really try to encourage them to take care of yourself throughout the entire process, because I mean, we're very transparent. I'm not gonna lie to them and say, this is gonna be easy. It's gonna be a breeze. We know it's going to be difficult for both sides, and even some witnesses to come in. You know, if you are called in as witness and you don't want to tell the Title IX investigator what happened because you know it's going to get your friend in trouble, that's a really tough position to put a college student in as well. So we understand the whole process is riddled with anxiety and trauma.
The statistics that the film quotes are pretty shocking about how many of those who are accused actually face consequences. Has that changed? I mean, I'm assuming there's accuracy in those numbers to some extent, even though you can do a lot with statistics. But the fact is, of course, that's why films like that got made, because we needed to talk about this. So I'm curious to know, have you seen a change? Do you feel like cases that they're all tricky, I get that, but are those, some of those who are rightfully accused, do you feel like the process is working in those situations better than perhaps it had in the past?
I do want to say something about the numbers. So we have, in the time of mandatory reporters, we would get significant numbers of reports. And the first thing we do is we reach out to the complainant and speak to them. Sometimes they say, no, that's not what happened. I don't know how you got that information. And so that might, in your statistics, show that was a Title IX complaint, but maybe it wasn't. Or the complainant will come in, provide their account, and then say, no, I don't want to have anything to do with this process. And so if we can go through the investigatory process through and reach a determination, there's another number of a report that doesn't culminate in some kind of disciplinary action. So those numbers, yes, they're dramatic, but there is a little bit of information to be read in them.
That's helpful. With the last 15 minutes that we have, I cannot believe how fast this time has flown. I think the really big elephant in the room is the recent regulation coming out of the Department of Education. And I'm going to back up to an earlier question, just as prelude. One of you mentioned a Dear Colleague letter. That was guidance, correct me if I'm wrong, issued during the Obama administration. That was an attempt to address some of the issues that they saw as problems. Well, under the current administration, the Department of Education has published in May, if I'm not mistaken, to go into force in August, regulations that bring the force of law to them, if I understand correctly. So could all of you speak to that and perhaps how you see that affecting how things are handled going forward? Don't all speak at once.
I have strong feelings. Just for some background, yes, the United States Department of Education issued Title IX regulations on May 6th, 2020, with an effective date of August 14th, 2020. So all colleges and universities, K through 12, higher ed, needed to do what they needed to do at their individual institutions to change policies or procedure to come into compliance with these new regulations. I think universally, I don't think you could talk to an institution that said that's an easy change. At ISU, we were doing a lot of things right already. I felt like some of the things that they've mandated, like due process and treat the parties equally, and they each have equal rights. I think those were some kind of, we're doing that already. You don't need to mandate that to us because we're doing that right. Some of the big changes were they changed the definition of what is sexual harassment. They changed our jurisdiction about what kind of cases, where it happens, or what kind of program or educational activity the event occurs in. Study abroad, if it didn't happen to a citizen in the United States, Title IX can't investigate that. Complainants are now required to file a signed formal complaint. And then finally, I think one of what I would identify as probably one of the most controversial provisions was the mandatory live hearing with the opportunity for the parties to cross-examine each other through an advisor. I think that that probably highlights those big changes that happened May 6th.
And as I understand from my research, of course, that gets to when you talk about this is a difficult process, an emotional, anxiety-ridden process, by introducing that the requirement for cross-examination. The worry, if I understand it correctly, is just that re-traumatization for the accuser, for the survivor. Is that? Am I making a wide generalization? Are there issues that I don't understand? Explain to me where that's a concern.
I think that can easily lend itself to the victim blaming line of thinking, and it can support that as well. If that opportunity is there for someone to be cross-examined by their accused, I think that victim blaming can be supported in that moment and can have some devastating impact on a victim in that moment. Like, I can't imagine being in that position, being a victim, being cross-examined, being blamed for my assault in front of an administration by my accuser. Like, that's a tough one. That's very difficult.
So as it was handled prior to these regulations going into effect, you would have the person who makes the complaint, written statements, I'm assuming with supporting documentation, but there wasn't that situation where it was almost more like an open courtroom of that person making the complaint being questioned by.
It was handled differently from university to university.
Okay.
So some universities had hearings. Some universities had these live hearings. Some universities employed a single investigator model where one investigator conducted the entire investigation, wrote an investigative report, and issued a determination. Some institutions might have had a panel. That's what we had at ISU. We would do a single investigation and then provide that investigative report to a panel of 3 trained faculty and staff members who would hear the matter. And if the parties wanted to participate, they had the option to participate if they wanted to. And if they didn't want to be in the same room with the individual, they didn't have to be in the same room with the individual. And that still is an option under its new regulations. One of the conditions is that it has to be recorded in some way, and that both parties must be able to, in the moment, hear and see everything that's happening in real time. So that's another change. But prior to the regulations, I'd say it wasn't consistent from institution to institution how it was handled. It could have been through written statements. It could have been through live interviews.
So this regulation then is requiring one standard system to be used across all schools. Is that correct? How have things been handled in the past at USI?
Did the investigatory model. Basically, 2 investigators were assigned to a case, wrote the investigative report, and it was reviewed by the Title IX coordinator at the time and their backup. And really, USI has only had a dedicated Title IX officer for about 4 years. Before that, I was the director of human resources. So people were doing dual jobs, and it was not done correctly, at least in my opinion. I mean, and as I said earlier, you were building the plane as you flew it because you really weren't sure which road to go down or which cloud to fly through. So it was very much a learning experience. So the universities that have dedicated someone to be a Title IX coordinator, not doing 2 different jobs, greatly has helped the process, has increased the training and awareness around our university.
So this may be a naive question, but why did the Department of Education make this change? It feels like we're heading backwards.
won't touch that one.
To me, it's, I would say that it seems like we're giving a lot of weight to the concept that of false accusations, a weight that doesn't deserve to be given. We recognize that it's very low. And as you can hear from, hearing about what does this process sound like, and this is just if the student decides to report through the school. The process is burdensome. The process sucks. Whether it's through the school, whether it's through the courts, no matter how you choose to do it, even with great players involved, it's exhausting and it takes an immense amount of emotional energy. And to think about what kind of person would invest that immense emotional, physical, mental energy into a process that they had no stake in if they didn't feel like they were victimized. It doesn't happen very often. It happens often that there are sexual assaults that aren't proven, that, there are sexual assaults where there's not enough evidence, or somebody decides that they don't want to testify, or they change their mind on reporting. But not that many people are making it up. And I think that this just makes it harder on the victim. And what I think was great about Title IX before was that the process wasn't so much like the highly traumatizing and stressful criminal justice process. And now it more closely mirrors that. And so I just think it creates more barriers to reporting.
Have,
Second that completely. I think Melinda mentioned earlier, all the barriers that a victim has for coming forward, this just adds one more layer on top, that you have to go through this extra step, and how troublesome that can be. And if I'm speaking openly and candidly, I think it's a lot of male fragility in that, false reporting, as Madeline mentioned, it's a way to CYA, to sort of have that have that infrastructure in place. So I think in terms of a response to sort of the Me Too movement and a lot of the self-doubt and self-blame that men had at that time, as they're reading all of these stories and they're internalizing what they're reading, I think it has had some negative impact as well. Not saying that Me Too movement is bad at all. I completely support it, and I think it's an incredible movement. But at the same time, once you start to sort of reach into that power of the superiority of males, I think that's when we start to see the ripple effect of things like this coming down, of we need to gain some more power back. We need to take some control of some other areas.
have this rule, these regulations are just over a month old. Have any cases on the Indiana State campus or the USI campus come up since then? Have you done any investigations under this newer set of regulations?
I have not done any investigations myself. Our Title IX office is under the new guidelines doing the best they can with these. It remains to be seen whether some of the reports will go down, the amount of reporting, because personally one of my opinions is now you have to have a formal written complaint. To me, a complaint is a complaint. I did work professional standards though with the Sheriff's Office, Internal Affairs. Not everybody wants to come forward and complain. You may get it third hand, but it's good information, and especially with predatory and serial rapist individuals.
So Steve, you're saying that in the past, if someone had come forward and said, I have a friend or a roommate who I believe has been attacked or has been a victim of this, that can start an investigation, whereas now, are you saying that an investigation can only start if that person, that survivor, has submitted a written complaint?
Our policy states you have to have a formal written complaint.
Okay.
One allowance that they've made is if the complainant does not wish to file a formal complaint, the Title IX coordinator can make a decision to file a Title IX, a formal complaint. They don't become the complainant, but in a circumstance where maybe the Title IX coordinator's done a threat of violence assessment and think that even if you don't have a willing complainant, that investigation needs to move forward. Those again, if you have an unwilling complainant who's not going to provide information, that's a hard investigation to proceed.
Mm-hmm. But you are instigating them out of concern for the safety of that person and others who may also suffer. Okay. Well, I deeply sympathize with, especially in this year of all years, with this new layer of regulation that all of you have to work under. With these last few minutes, I wanted to end on maybe a little bit of an upbeat note. I'm curious to know from each one of you, what part of your work gives you hope?
We have great campus partners, and we collaborate with so many individuals across campus, and everybody is willing to pitch in and excited about the work. And I know I've said it a couple times tonight, the culture change. That is what gives me hope. I feel like if we continue to do our programming, our education, and get more buy-in across all levels of campus, and I think we need to start younger. I think by waiting until students get to college to talk about consent is a missed opportunity. I think there needs to be education start at a younger age, and seeing more movement in that area, so that gives me hope. I'd like for college students, when they get here as 18-year-olds or non-traditional age students, to know what consent is.
Madeline, gives you hope?
I would say just the absolute resilience and tenacity of the survivors that I work with. Their amazing ability to adapt to the wildest of circumstances. And also, I think that right now, beyond just this, we're having a lot of new conversations about what justice can look like. We know that the traditional justice system doesn't serve victims. And so as we kind of dive deeper into those conversations, looking at what a truly survivor-centered approach to kind of justice could look like, and where the focus is really on healing, and where we make our biggest investment in ensuring the supports that are in place for those survivors. That's my hope, at least.
Sam, what gives you hope?
Well, from the community perspective, I think it is just the overall sense of acceptance that I see across campus, that I didn't see that 5 years ago. And then to piggyback on Stephannie, I think we have got a great network here at USI where so much is built upon creating netting for our students and students first. Across our campus, I always hear this theme, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have a job. And I think that's very true. And I know we're really good about finding, who can provide the best service at the best time. And sometimes it's our office, sometimes it's the counseling center, or the dean's office, or the Title IX coordinator. And we're always looking to find who can make the biggest impact with that student, and make sure that we make those connections for them. Not just say, you need to go there, but take that conscious effort. Let me walk you there. And I see that it's great among our community.
Thank you. Burton, what gives you hope?
I think what gives me the most hope is just generally this this generation of college students, just how socially aware and conscious they are, how passionate they are, how energetic they are about change, and how they utilize social media in a way that I never thought would be utilized. And they really, they're our future, right? Like, they're our future leaders. They are our future lawmakers. And I see the ability for true change for the first time in my lifetime. I think that they are leading us there. And I think as they get older, sort of my role as a mentor and as someone who can help them grow as individuals, I see a lot of hope in them. And that's what keeps me coming to work every day.
Stephen.
Piggyback on what Sam said, but the collaboration, as others have echoed, is just tremendous at our university. Everyone's wanting to be there to help each other out. That sense of urgency that I mentioned earlier is there. No one lets any grass grow under their feet when they're dealing with a situation like this. It wants to be resolved. It's tough to do because if you've ever been a Title IX investigator, these investigations don't go real fast. And you want them to, so you do the best you can. So I'm just really proud of our university and the collaboration that is present.
Melinda.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that everybody said here so far, and all of those things give me hope in so many different ways, from the collaborative community response teams that we have, the campus teams, the students who are motivated to create social programming and clubs that are centered around attacking this. Yes, this whole generation of social justice warriors that keeps me excited constantly in what I see in the social media. And the thing is everybody has a lot of times their own cause that they want to support, but I think that today's generation is starting to realize how everybody's causes kind of overlap, and you lift one boat and you lift all the boats, and it's really coming together to make that. And it's exciting because it's not even just the young people. It's honestly, I'm seeing people from all walks of life in all different kinds of groups. We hold sessions like this, and the people, all of you who came tonight, you're part of the answer, you're part of the solution, and you're what gives me hope, because you came out and you wanted to hear more, and you wanted to learn about what's going on in the world and make change. And as long as we all work actively to be change makers, that's what gives me hope.
Well, I have to say, and I don't mean to sound cliche, but you watch The Hunting Ground and you sort of get this pit in your stomach, and then I really feel a lot of hope from listening to all of you and understanding how far we've come as a society in terms of our willingness and awareness. But it's because there's people like you showing up every day and being there for those who need the help. And I really thank you. We had a number of people around the state that we contacted who were not available, but all were so wonderful in saying that they supported this work that we're doing. So I really genuinely have to say thank you to all of you for taking time out of your evening. I wish we could keep going. The time flew. I had 10 questions and I think I only got to 2 of them. And we had great questions and input from those who joined us. We'll be back on the 6th of October, same time, 7 o'clock Eastern, and we'll be taking on the issue of military sexual assault. I know none of these topics are cheerful, but they are important and we need to talk about them. And there are a lot of people doing a lot of work on it. So thank you so much for helping us understand better what's going on our college campuses. Spread the word about our next one, and then our last one on the 20th of October will be talking about, going off the film On the Record, about the issue of sexual assault in the music industry. So I urge all of you to go to cancanindy.com and check out all that we're doing, because we're also doing a lot of fun things too, but we also take on serious topics like this and others, because that's what we do. We're a not-for-profit with a really strong mission to take on these big issues and use film and conversation. So thank you all of you for helping me. Thank you for the audience who joined us. And please keep in touch with us and have a great week and a really good evening. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Take care, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.